I'm very excited about this talk. Sue Ieraci, is that correct pronunciation? That'll do for now. Always good to check while you're on the podium. Sue is a specialist emergency physician. She's a member of the Stop the AVN group and most recently Friends of Science in Medicine. She's here to talk to us about human rights and pseudoscience. Please make some noise for Sue.
Thank you for the introduction, and so good to see so many old and new friends here. I want to particularly thank Amelia. Where did she go? What a lovely oration, and it just goes to show that skeptically minded people have the best sense of humour, right? So many of us here are here today because we've got very similar understanding of the world and the way we evaluate information. And we've shared lots of talks before on all sorts of different phenomena. Something that struck me earlier this year was to look at the idea of people's human rights being betrayed by both the spread of misinformation and the use of pseudoscience. So the more I started to think about that model, the more examples I came up with of areas where people's rights may well be infringed by both the spread and the use of pseudoscience. So when I push the forward, so I've come up with 4 stories that illustrate different aspects of how human rights are affected. Facilitated communication I'll probably spend the most time on. Some of you will have heard of that, but I'll explain what it is and how it works. And that's probably the most dramatic example of how use of pseudoscience can affect the human rights of very vulnerable people. Autism is another area where children are vulnerable and families are very vulnerable, looking for answers to help their vulnerable children. Cancer care, you'll all have heard some bad examples of, as we heard a bit earlier. And that finally, those of you who've seen Susan Gerbic present will know about the ways that so-called psychics or pseudo-psychics take advantage of grieving people. So I'll go through each of these and use some examples. No, I've gone backwards. Okay, just looking around the room, how many people have heard of the term facilitated communication? Okay, many of you. So for those who haven't, I'll explain a little bit. So just to read there, it involves providing physical support to people with disabilities as they type out messages on a keyboard, or an old-fashioned way was a letterboard where the alphabet would be printed on a board. And in this particular example, it appears to result in extremely or profoundly disabled people being revealed to have either normal or more commonly superior intellectual skills, even though they've spent their lives profoundly disabled. And if you're interested in some more references, they're peppered through the talk, but there are a lot of these topics you can do easy Google searches on. No. My energy doesn't seem to be transmitting through the ether. This is the origin of so-called facilitated communication. The woman on the left is Rosemary Crossley, who was an Australian. I'm pretty sure she's since died. She was originally in disabled education for people with intellectual disability, and she developed an idea that she tested with the woman Anne MacDonald, who suffered from cerebral palsy. I don't know what her overall level of function was, but these two formed a relationship that led to Rosemary Crossley doing a lot of study and then finding evidence that supposedly supported her idea that the communication method that she pioneered was actually allowing someone without a voice to express their voice. And Crossley then gathered the interest of people from the US who came and visited her, took the practice overseas, and of course the US market grossly exaggerates everything and made it become a big movement. I found this saying over and over in the sites that I saw that for proponents of facilitated communication. And it's hard not to argue that everybody in life has the right to express themselves to their best ability. The problem of this, as I'll explain in a moment, is that it's making an assumption that everyone who has a disability in expressing themselves has a deeply seated but hidden enormous intellect that's just waiting to come out. And as we know, that's not only is that not true, but it's got some potential harm for the people that are subjected to it. What I'm going to show you now are some still shots I took from a series of videos. And what you'll see here is that the facilitator, who's represented by that woman who's got her arm around the young man, what they did in this original version is that the facilitator would guide the hand of the disabled person, who often had cerebral palsy, and that meant it was true that they weren't able to guide the digit of their hand in a precise way. So they were able to argue, and it sounded reasonable, that the person was able to spell, but because of their cerebral palsy and the muscle spasticity, they weren't able to point accurately. So these people, including Crossley and her followers, said that they were helping these people to express themselves. Now, what you won't necessarily notice straight away if you watch the video and don't see the stills is that this young man isn't even looking at the keyboard that he's supposedly typing on. Who's looking at the keyboard? His facilitator. You can see there from the other angle, she's holding his hand and looking at the keyboard while he's looking away. And even more importantly here, see his left hand. In the video, you'll see he actually starts pressing keys with that left hand. The facilitator puts her hand across and stops him because she wants him to type with the hand that she's guiding. Here's another famous example which was tragic. People know about this case. This is someone who developed a relationship again with a very disabled young man. This woman, Anne Stubblefield, not only became the facilitator of communication for this young man, but developed a sexual relationship with him. It was thought by the family that he was taken advantage of, and she was subsequently convicted of sexual assault. She spent some time in prison. If you're interested in reading that story, take a snapshot of that. She started off telling the family that she'd be able to help him communicate, but she ended up getting embroiled and getting him embroiled in a very complex relationship where the sense of consent definitely wasn't apparent. And she was in a powerful relationship there. Now, one of the things that's really important here is to distinguish what they called facilitated communication with newer technology that's known as AAC, augmentative and alternative communication. And the big difference is that the augmented communication is actually technology which allows someone who already knows how to communicate or has been able to communicate to continue to do so. And Stephen Hawking is a poster child of that he had a brilliant mind and knowledge and was able to spell and discuss long before he became disabled. So that the AAC technology is allowing people who know how to communicate the tools in order to do that. Now, just before I go there, one of the things that's a feature of people using FC, facilitated communication, is they take their subjects to university courses and they graduate university. Now, these are people who may never have had any formal schooling, and even if they had a very fine intellect, the fact that they've never been taught the alphabet but are suddenly able to write theses in university degrees is just totally implausible. Now, the good part, how do you debunk this? And many trials have been done of this, where they basically separate the facilitator with the child and they show a different image to the two test subjects. So you'll see there that the facilitator's being shown a picture of a dog, the child's being shown whatever it is because it's a blurred picture, and a cat. And you'll find that the child miraculously types DOG. And this has been done in different ways by many different investigators who've basically found that the person speaking is not the disabled person, it's the facilitator. And we'll talk about all sorts of reasons why that violates human rights. So a lot of people would ask the question, and this is done with a lot of pseudoscience, with a lot of alternative medicine, what's the harm? Well, as you can see from those examples I've given, there are a lot of harms. And one of the real human rights questions is who is doing the speaking? And it's clear from the investigations that have been done that the speaking is being done by the facilitator, not by the disabled person. The next thing that needs a bit more thought, but I think it's just as important a human right, is that it's almost universal that these people who are being helped to communicate suddenly turn out to be extraordinarily gifted intellectually. And you have to wonder why people need to demonstrate that. And I guess it's important to understand that parents of profoundly disabled people have a disappointment or a grief that they can't have a complex conversation with their child, that they can't see them flourish. Some of them can flourish in other ways, some less so, but it sets up an expectation that everybody's child has to be a genius, and as if we haven't got that in middle class society already. The next thing that happens is you'll find that the facilitator will say, I've got a special relationship with this person and they can only speak through me. So the result of that is an alienation of their own family, their siblings and their parents, because suddenly only this special facilitator is able to get the language out of the person. And that can cause real disruption in a family where the parents and the siblings have cared for this person all their lives, but the other person's taking credit for having this person able to communicate. And then, as you saw with a woman who was jailed, there can be actual physical abuse of the disabled people as well. Okay, the next big area to talk about is autism. And I guess you'll all have seen a lot of the pseudoscience around autism. Our crowd has focused on it because of the stuff about Wakefield falsely linking MMR vaccine to autism. But you'll all know that a lot of the reason for the doubt that's around is that the diagnosis of autism has gone up hugely in recent years. There are good explanations for that. They relate to the way the diagnosis is made. They relate to more help being available for people in this education space. So we now know that people who would previously have been seen as difficult or learning disabled or just disruptive would be excluded from school, whereas now there's a policy of inclusion together with support. So the support is gained through having a diagnosis, people queue up for a diagnosis and the numbers go up. So we know all of those features. One of the things that, I wonder if there's any relationship between me touching the control and the slides moving. Is it?
Circle goes forward, the small circle.
I failed the intelligence test.
Hold your hand.
Touche.
Just give me a nod if you want to go forward.
Okay, I want to go back. This is pure, whether it changes or not is pure chance. So I showed this slide because when I was reading up about autism and pseudoscience, I came across this organisation, and it's really worth bookmarking that page, because if you want to argue with people about vaccines or anything to do with the pseudoscience in autism, this website has a lot of debunking, and it also has some high quality research that you can use to understand diagnosis of autism. So that's worth looking up. They've got a lot of resources. Even the big one doesn't do anything. Look at that.
Okay.
Yes, please. Back one, please. So I just copied this from a page to show you how many of them there are, that autistic children are very vulnerable and their families are seen as very vulnerable to being taken advantage of for everything from transcranial magnetic stimulation to dolphin-assisted therapy. I think that'd be pretty good for well-being. Next slide, thanks. So if you go to this site, you can search for information on just about any topic related to autism. So that's a really useful one to know. Next, thanks. Again, what's the harm? There are particularly enormous harms for vulnerable parents and vulnerable children with these sorts of disabilities. Firstly, like a lot of pseudo cures for things, focusing on an ineffective therapy means that you're missing out on either therapies or practices or teaching that might be more effective, and even just quality time with the person instead of having them sitting there pointing at screens. Definitely there's a financial impact. So like a lot of, as we saw in the video we saw earlier, that there are very few people who claim to have magical answers for things who don't then have a magical cost that they'd like to pay you to buy them. The opportunity loss was pretty much what I said before. And these pseudoscience groups are still perpetuating the anti-vaccine message that we saw. RFK Jr. is still pushing. All sorts of people are still going on about what Wakefield did back in the 90s. And there seems to be no amount of correction or research or data that can correct that horrible myth that doesn't seem to go away. And I guess a lot of you know that RFK Jr. was associated with that outbreak of measles that was in Samoa about 10 years back. And quite a number of children died because RFK and some Australian anti-vaxxers supported local anti-vaxxers who scared people off getting their children vaccinated. Lots of children were very sick with measles and a number of them died. So there are definitely harms when the anti-vaxxers get involved in that space.
Okay, so I've got another one. Let's try this one.
Thank you.
You're welcome, thank you.
Let's see the correlation with it improving.
That way, and that seems
That
to be
one I can probably work out. Thank you. So in the last section, no, we've got two more. This area is fairly obvious that there's been a lot of abuse of people through scam treatments for very serious disease. And as we've heard earlier today, there's a lot of focus on the kinds of conditions that are either chronic and or thought to be difficult to cure. It makes sense when there's uncertainty about a condition, when there's a poor prognosis or potentially poor, when the conventional treatments are really difficult like chemotherapy. Of course there's a natural desire to look for an easy answer and something that doesn't poison you and so on, that the natural approach seems to be attractive. Many of you will know the studies that came out in the last few years showing that there's no doubt that people who use non-conventional treatment for cancers have a worse outcome. Yay, works. Okay, here I want to make another distinction between complementary and alternative therapies. And I'm now saying, and many people agree with me, that we shouldn't use the term CAM because complementary therapies that assist well-being are totally different kettle of fish to alternative so-called cures. So I don't have any issue with people using meditation or exercise to improve their well-being and their overall health. But those conditions shouldn't be falsely claimed to cure anything, and they shouldn't be used as a substitute for anything. But we know, of course, that the quackery leads to worse outcomes. Another bit of information, this one from Scientific American earlier this year, again about a particular kind of quackery related to diets. And many of you will know about, there was the Gerson diet, there's juicing, there's, for God's sake, caffeine enemas, coffee enemas. Why you would want to use that orifice, I don't understand. But there's more and more information in the mainstream press as well as in the journals showing that these things do harm. But of course, we all know about that phenomenon called motivated reasoning, where when we strongly desire for something or we have a strong belief in something, then we'll look past the evidence that contradicts us and look for the confirmation of what we already believe. Just thought I'd give you a bit of a spectrum of the sorts of things that have been claimed to be cancer treatments there. You can see everything from ear candling and dance therapy to shark cartilage, which I would have thought the sharks need more than we do. Like, imagine how floppy they would be otherwise. This is a story many of you will know, and I want to tell it because it's dramatic. Now, all of the information that I'll present today, including the images, from the public domain, so I'm not breaking anyone's confidence or revealing anything that's not already well known. This is the story of a young woman called Penelope Dingle, whose life was dramatically shortened because of belief in quackery and loss of confidence in science-based medicine. If you're interested, look up the WA coroner's report into the death of Penelope Dingle. It's easy to find just through a Google search. So I'll read this out because it's important. The WA coroner has been critical of a homeopath and a prominent Perth toxicologist. You know who that is, right? Over the death of a woman who used alternative treatments to treat her cancer. She was diagnosed 2 years earlier. She had rectal cancer, but decided against surgery and chemoradiotherapy in favour of homeopathy and alternative medicine. In his findings, the coroner said that the homeopath, who is named, that's no secret, convinced her that she could cure her cancer and gave her what he described, the coroner, as dangerous and outrageous advice. This is an Australian story worth watching. It's available on YouTube. My timer has gone blank. Thank you. That was the healthy young woman you saw there. The coroner also said, in my view, the homeopath advising against surgery in these circumstances was an outrageous thing to do. The coroner didn't hold back. The homeopath had minimal medical knowledge and was giving dangerous advice. Now, the bottom part is interesting because Penelope Dingle kept a diary. In her writings, she claimed that the homeopath had told her regularly that the pain was between my ears and that it was only after the procedure, she eventually had surgery, that she learned that rectal cancer is one of the most painful cancers which can be experienced. The homeopath denied that this had occurred and stated that she believed that the deceased was overly sensitive to pain. If there's anything that threatens human rights, it's telling a person with very severe and invasive cancer that they're too sensitive to the pain. Again, if you want to look up the WA coroner and Dingle, it's worth doing. What does her ex-husband do now? Is there any bigger irony? This guy who encouraged his wife in a way that made her die of rectal cancer is now talking about gut secrets and gut healing. If that's not worthy of scorn, I don't know what is. So again, we've said all of those things. We know with good evidence that there are poorer outcomes. We saw good evidence there that the suffering can be enormous. Victim blaming. And this poor woman was told over and over that she was in pain or suffering because she didn't believe enough or that she wasn't trying hard enough. It made her more and more suspicious of science-based medicine because the homeopath was coaching her to be suspicious. And of course, they seem to manage to make a lot of money out of that. The last area I want to talk about just quickly is something we've heard about a few times, particularly from Susan Gerbic and the late Mark Edward, who had illustrated this beautifully by being a pseudo-psychic and showing how this sort of stuff is done. You can see over there, I just happened to find a psychic spirit workshop that's given at the bargain price of $197, where you just sit in a big room like this and the guy wears a bad shirt out the front. By the way, Dr. Carl's shirts are much better than this guy. There's Psychic Sally. She's amazing and absolutely incredible. Well, I agree with incredible. But have a look down the bottom there. What do you reckon you go to the pre-show and interval drinks for? That's how they read you. That's where the hot readings come from. So people infiltrate the drink session. The customers think, oh, isn't it lovely that she's invited us to drinks? That's so the workers can gather information about you that she then magically reads about you during the session. Oh, and membership benefits so that once she already knows you, it's even easier for her. This sort of stuff is all over the place now. Just like COVID led to lots of online work for everybody, there's heaps and heaps of online work for so-called psychics. This is just something you can quickly read, that here's one of the many excuses they read, that I warned somebody that something would happen, therefore they took action to prevent it happening, so it's not my fault that the thing didn't come about, it's because I gave the warning and the person adjusted. There's no end of excuses. You don't remember? Ask your sister when you get home, because you've already paid for my reading. I can only tell you what the spirits are telling me. Oh, and has anyone here got an elderly relative whose name starts with R? And obviously you have to be open, because if they won't speak, it's your fault. Grieving is a lonely place, but one of the real problems with vulnerable grieving people is that these so-called grief vampires make them cling on to their grieving so that they can take advantage of them and particularly make money. Again, I'd say this is disgraceful. It's not just entertainment. These are not qualified counsellors. They don't know the way to manage grief. They make the people dependent on them and stuck in their grief, and most of all, they bleed them of money. So I just wanted to go back one. No, that's me. Here's my manifesto, which I'd encourage us all to agree on today. Every individual deserves the benefits of valid science and evidence to inform their choices and allow them to access the most effective assistance. The opposition to and correction of misinformation and pseudoscience is an exercise in promoting human rights. So please go forth and promote human rights. Thank you.
With your first example of the facilitated, whatever it was.
Communication.
Yes. Those disabled children were supposedly working at the level of geniuses.
Yes.
Well, I mean, if they weren't the genius, then it must have been the facilitator who was the genius. So why was a facilitator putting aside their time when they could be getting on with being a genius doing something else?
I take it that's a rhetorical question.
No, it's not. I don't see how anyone could describe these people as geniuses, because they couldn't be any smarter than the facilitator, could they?
That's true. I guess proportional to their age. It's interesting to think that maybe some of those facilitators never got to go to university themselves, so they were living vicariously through the people that they were. Thank you.
Robin Williams, may I just add to your list something that I did in broadcasting because I thought I was going to be generous, and
Yes.
that was past lives therapy.
Oh, yes.
And I invited them into the studio, a man and a woman, and I said, okay, well, if you can demonstrate. And he touched her elbow and she went into a past life and she turned out to be the person in charge of a space station on a faraway planet. And I said, would you describe it? What's it like? And she said, it's big. It's very, very big. Go on.
And?
It's
Yeah.
very, very, very big.
Maybe it was the very, 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 very big telescope.
Oh, you've heard of Yeah, that's going to be broadcast in three weeks' time. It's an extremely large telescope. No.
Yes.
But you see, the reason I gave up, I would have enjoyed an interesting story, but some of this was so mundane.
Yes.
They were so used to getting away with murder, so to speak, that
That's right.
I thought no more. Anyway, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks. Thanks, everyone.